The US has attacked three nuclear sites in the state of Iran. We are very fortunate to have Syed Akif Zaidi explain to us what is going on. He is an Indian citizen who has lived in Iran for over 15 years. He is a research scholar at the Al-Mustafa International University and a very fine political analyst who keenly observes the developments in Iran and what is happening in the region. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Zaidi. What is happening now in Iran?
Thank you very much for having me for this conversation. And we are going through some very historic times. And hopefully, we will have a useful and fruitful discussion in this regard. Um, well, what happened this morning, as you know, was an important and historic turning point. The United States of America says that it bombed three nuclear sites in Iran, one of which is not far from where I live. I live in the city of Qom, which is the nearest city to the site called Fordo. So it bombed this site, and it is a historic turning point, I believe, because this would mark the first instance where a declared nuclear power, along with another nuclear power, I mean the USA and the Israel, have attacked a non nuclear state and signatory of the NPT. And we should also add that the United States of America is the only country in the world that has used nuclear weapons against civilian populations back in August of 1945, after Imperial Japan had already entered into surrender negotiations. So it is a historic turning point, an unprovoked and shocking attack by nuclear powers against a member of the NPT. That's one aspect that makes it historic. The other aspect that makes it historic is that there has been a conflict going on in West Asia for 45 years now. And this is not between two countries or a set of countries, but this is between two ideologies and two sets of values. On the one hand, you have the American led imperial axis, the axis of arrogance, led by America with Israel as its very important component. And this axis has been around for about 200 to 250 years. Of course, not with America leading it. Earlier on, it used to be other European countries leading this colonial axis. But ever since the Second World War, it's America that's at the forefront of this colonial imperial axis. But 45 years ago, a challenge to this axis emerged when the Islamic Revolution occurred in 1979 in Iran, which then led to the formation of another axis in the West Asian region. The axis which was often dismissively derided as proxies of Iran, but this is in fact an axis of allies and partners. Now, this conflict has been going on for 45 years. Today is a historic turning point in the sense that the Western, the imperial axis, the American led axis, has for the first time been forced to enter into direct military confrontation with the leader of the Islamic resistance axis, which is Iran. Right up until now, we've always seen this axis pushing forward other elements, partners, junior components. For example, there was a time when they pushed Saddam Hussein forward to fight this war. At another occasion, they created ISIS and pushed it forward. Or most recently, Israel was pushed forward to engage with Iran. But this is now a historic turning point because the head of this axis has now been forced to drop all pretense and enter into direct military confrontation with Iran. With regards to how things are in Iran and how what I've been seeing and observing over the last 8 to 9 days, well, this attack by Israel began on the 13th of June. Today, now it is the 22nd of June. This attack began on the 13th of June. And in this period, what I have observed is that for the greater part, life has more or less carried on normally in Iran. I can share some details of that later, but life has more or less carried on normally in Iran. And this morning as well, this attack on Fordo and other locations. While we were in Qom, I don't know anybody in Qom who heard even the sound of this explosion, but we picked it up from the news that yes, this attack has been made. And while I was out in Qom this morning and coming here to do this discussion with you, life was pretty normal. The shops were open, there was traffic, everything was running just as it normally does. And I can share some more perspective on that in
But the
as we move ahead.
but Iran is it not on its own today and taking on two nuclear powers, as you say it? And Iran does have it can fight long battles. It's a country that's had an it's been boycotted by many countries of the West. It has faced challenges in the past. But right now, when you're faced with the powerful military like the US, so how will Iran fight back? Is it an answer that you can give? Is there any clarity? And because the Americans and the Israelis keep talking about regime change as well. So I ask you that.
Sure, sure. I think that this conflict will has already begun to um, clear the air and clarify and bring to the forefront the reality of the balance of power that actually exists on the ground, as opposed to the balance of power that exists in media bubbles. It is when we talk of any kind of a long term conflict, all the odds are stacked against America and Israel for a variety of reasons. At the outset, I'd just like to remind all our viewers that the USA hasn't won a single military conflict since 1945. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, later on, what happened in Iraq, what happened most recently in Afghanistan, every time there has been any kind of a military conflict which has dragged on for a little more than a couple of days, without exception, and this is very important to note, without exception, the US military machine has folded and been defeated. So that's an important context to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is that when it comes to public support in any kind of war that drags on, public support is very important and very critical. I'm here in Iran, I'm observing things right up close in this regard. When the Israeli attack began on the 13th of June, on the 14th of June, which was the following day, there was a holiday here anyway. There was an Eid-e-Ghadir. It's a religious holiday here in Iran. On that day, immediately following the attack, and the attack on the 13th of June was most severe in Tehran. I wasn't in Tehran, I was in Qom on that day, but it was all over the news that Tehran itself saw 3 million ordinary residents coming out onto the streets to celebrate this religious holiday on the day following the Israeli attack. And in fact, the Israeli attack was continuing on the 14th of June. A couple of days ago, we had Friday prayers. This was a historic event in Iran because I've been here for many years, attended many Friday prayers, but I do not recall seeing such a massive turnout for Friday prayer. Men, women, children, old people, all there was so much crowd, there was so much traffic that the prayers ended and there were so many people that were simply stuck in traffic all around the city trying to get to the location. They were just not able to make it. And once Friday prayer was over, for a duration of 2 hours, and you know the temperatures here at this time of the year are 40 degrees or higher. At the peak of that heat, that afternoon heat, for about 2 hours, those who had made it to the Friday prayers and the large number that had not been able to reach in time, all of them got together and there was a protest procession that went around the streets surrounding the location of the Friday prayers. It went on for 2 hours in that heat, all of them calling out to the enemies, to their enemies, America, to Israel, challenging them to a much harder fight. In terms of public opinion, Iran is in a very, very strong position and always has been. At this point, I would just like to add that I think that there are probably three emotions that seem to be most strongly visible in the large majority of the Iranian population. And the first emotion is there is an element of joy and happiness. The joy and happiness is at the fact that Iran is now has rained collectively more than 1,000 missiles and drones have been sent in the direction of the Zionist entity, which is called Israel. More than 1,000. So there is an immense joy and happiness at having this opportunity to openly target the genocidal regime in Israel. Second, there is an amazing willingness to fight, and which I just described to you, be it the back on Saturday last week, when more than 3 million people came out just in Tehran, or the Friday prayers. There is this sense that we are on the right, we have been wronged, we did not do anything wrong, we were targeted illegitimately, first by Israel and then now by America. And that brings out an enormous sense of a desire to fight back among the Iranian people. And they believe that when somebody is on the right, God will support them. I'm just about to finish in a couple of sentences. God will support them. And therefore, there is this and that's the third. Then we come to the third emotion, which is an immense sense of hope and confidence that victory is near and at hand. So that is the situation, and that continues to be the situation even after the commencement of the American attack this morning.
So that is a psychological state that you are describing. It's a sentiment, it's an emotion. And yes, Iran is a large country. It's got one of the largest reserves of oil in the world. It has had a long war with Iraq. We all know the history. It has a huge land. It's a lot of land. But yet, once the Americans have entered the fray, this scorched earth policy, which applied to Afghanistan, which applied in Iraq, Libya, all of that, the Americans have a way of conducting their wars in the region. So now, today, after the American strikes, when it's clear that the US is very much party to what began with the Israel first attacking Iran, after that, today, Iranian strikes on Israel continue. And apparently, there's been a lot of damage inside Israel. Now, to save that outpost of the West, which is Israel, which always relies on the US, will they not come back? Could they not come back with something bigger, like nuclear weapons against not just facilities, against cities? Could they not take out the missile launchers? I'm asking you, what are the concerns? How do you see it?
The possibility of use of nuclear weapons against civilian population by America is a real possibility. Let's not forget that it's the only country that's done that, and it is inhuman enough in various aspects to be able to do that. And so, in itself, their willingness to do it is not under in question. The only thing that's holding them back, and that's a big thing that's holding them back, is their fear of the consequences. And here I do not mean the protests that will break out inevitably if they use these nuclear weapons. Since the 7th of October, they've pretty much now come to a point where they've decided that they just simply cannot afford to care about public opinion. Public opinion has built up against them enormously, especially on the European and American streets. But they've decided that this is a price that we simply have to pay if we have to survive, if our hegemony has to survive in West Asia and in the world. So I don't think they're going to be particularly scared about the public backlash, particularly on the Western street. What they are concerned about, and that's what's going to hold them back, is the fact that they know that Iran and the resistance axis that it leads has been preparing for every scenario for decades now, including the most horrific scenario of the use of nuclear weapons by the USA. Iran is a large country. Iran's missile production facilities and storage and launch facilities are dispersed around the country. A large chunk of them are placed underground, deep inside the Rocky Mountains that cover almost all of Iran. And Iran has been strategically gaming and preparing for every possibility, including for this horrifying possibility that we are just talking about right now. And it is this fear of consequence that is going to hold them back. But of course, they may still make a miscalculation and they will, of course, pay a commensurate price if they make another miscalculation in this regard. Iran, it is important to understand that Iran at this point is not in need of military assistance from other forces, at least not at this point. And that's because it has been preparing for this and much larger conflict for a long time.
But to keep a long war going, you need supplies, you need is there any support which is coming from China, from Russia? The I just heard the Iranian foreign minister say he's going to Moscow. Do
Yes.
we
Uh,
Could this be the arena in which sort of the world order plays out, except that the Chinese are not known to like economic chaos so much.
mhm.
So I'm putting all of this to you.
Yes, yeah.
So
Well, it's no secret. It's no secret that in that China, Russia, and Iran are on the same page when it comes to challenging American and Western hegemony, and they share a common interest in a multipolar world which is emerging rapidly. And part of the reason that it is emerging rapidly is because of the role that these three countries are playing. So, in terms of diplomatic support, that support exists between these three countries. But in terms of military support, I don't see that on the horizon yet. I don't see it. By way of just to make my point clear, Russia has offered moral and diplomatic support, firstly by condemning all these strikes, firstly by the Israeli strike and the American strike. And it has declared that it will not be pulling out its technicians from the Bushehr nuclear energy plant, which was not targeted this morning. And by declaring that Russian technicians will continue to work there, it has in a way declared its moral backing for the Iranian defense at this point. But when Mr. Putin was asked about 3 days ago in a Russian interview whether there it's going to get into the war with supplies and forces, etc., they said that we have no defense cooperation or agreement with Iran. In fact, he added that some time ago we had broached the topic of defense cooperation with them, and Iran did not show any interest in taking this topic forward with us. So I don't see any kind of Russian or Chinese or any other kind of military supplies or forces or anything of that sort coming to the aid of Iran in the foreseeable future. It may exist,
can I ask
but
you
I do
now?
not foresee any of these countries coming to the military aid of Iran in the foreseeable future.
Okay, so you're saying Iran is going to fight on its own, and what about in the region? There have been competing. There has known to be competition in the region, and Iran is supposed to have taken losses. Hezbollah got badly hit in Lebanon after October 7th, when the Israelis extended that war into that country, and when also there's been a change of regime in Syria, and Iraq, one is not clear what goes on there. I'm not. You must be. But the point that I'm asking is what about in the region? Turkey has been condemning, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all these countries are condemning Israeli actions. But will are they allies? Are they calling up? Are they finding a solution? If some of them have bases, American bases. So, how will this whole chess in the region play out?
Well, all the countries in the region, without perhaps the exception of Syria, which is of course not a genuinely independent state anymore, all the other countries have uh, condemned Israeli aggression and perhaps by now the American aggression on Iran as well. And these countries do not wish to see war in this region. And many of these countries are actually ruled by undemocratic and unpopular rulers, as well, as you're well aware. One of the main reasons that they do not wish to see war in this region is that they understand that this war will end with American hegemony greatly diminished in this region, if not entirely vanquished and erased. And these powers are to a large degree dependent on American backing. With the present rulers of, be it Israel, Jordan, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, or many of the other little Gulf states, they cannot, in any realistic view, expect to survive without Western backing. And any war in this region ends with Western hegemony greatly decline. And that's why they are really, really afraid of this war and they do not wish to see the war continuing. But unfortunately, what has happened is that their Western backer, America, has been forced to choose the option of war because it sees its hegemony diminishing and slipping away anyway. So it's a kind of gamble that America has been forced to take this morning by dropping all pretense and finally coming out and attacking a non-nuclear and but yet very powerful militarily, strategically, very powerful state and country called Iran. So, as I said once again, the fight in terms of military terms, Iran is going to fight alone for the foreseeable future, and it has been preparing itself for that. In terms of public support within Iran and in the larger Muslim world, and in fact, let me add, even beyond the Muslim world, public support and sympathy already exists with Iran and will grow further as this war carries on. But military support, I don't see military support coming in the foreseeable future from any other country because Iran fundamentally doesn't need it.
Okay,
Israel, on the other,
yeah,
yes, yeah.
I must ask you here. Pakistan is a nuclear armed state. It's a Islamic country. It's a Muslim country. And they have just asked that since you are an Indian citizen and this is of concern to us, they have just nominated the US President Donald Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. So, how do you see? And Pakistan also has a large border with Iran. So I asked you this, that we are looking at Saudi Arabia, we are looking at Qatar, all of them have tried to play roles. Turkey is very active in seeking a diplomatic solution, and Turkey is a large country with an army also. Unlike some of the others that I mentioned, they have a army. Pakistan does too. So how do you see the role of Pakistan in as a nuclear weapon state?
I think Pakistan or Turkey or any of the other countries at this point do not have a decisive role to play at this stage of the conflict.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, all these countries are openly expressing support for Iran and condemning all these attacks. That's true, but none of them wishes to see this war continue. At this point, once again, let me add that more than diplomatic support or diplomatic posturing or passing on of messages from here to there, I do not see any of these countries. I do not even see Russia or China playing a fundamental, decisive role in any action that will be taken. This is fundamentally a fight between Iran and America. But of course, Iran has its own network of allies in the region that calls itself the Islamic Resistance Axis. America has its own network of client states in the region, which the resistance axis chooses to call the international imperial axis. It's fundamentally between these two fronts and axes, and others will play a minor role, at least for the foreseeable future.
So the scenario you're painting is an ongoing battle which will drag on for a while, right? Do you think that Iran will be patient, or it will directly attack American presence in the region, or we cannot say, or it will continue to target Israel?
I think we'll know in a few hours or so. I believe there's been an announcement that Ayatollah Khamenei is going to make, yeah, his third public statement since
Okay.
the Israeli attack began. That's going to clear a lot of things, and that's probably going to be out in a few hours, or it may even have begun even as we're speaking right now.
Mm.
We'll know in some time. The picture will be clearer. Understanding is, my own estimation of what's likely to happen is that the attacks on Israel, the retaliatory attacks on Israel will continue and
Mm.
they will be treated as a separate file, which is associated with the unprovoked Israeli aggression on the 13th of June. And a new file will be opened with regards to retaliation against American interests. But I don't see that happening. I may be wrong, but I do not see that happening in a sudden and dramatic fashion. Iran has never acted in a emotionally, suddenly, dramatically. What I expect is to see is that Iran will probably go through the whole process of demanding a United Nations Security Council meeting and insisting that the United Nations Security Council condemn unequivocally this unprovoked attack, etc., etc. We'll go through with all that. And since America will, of course, not let that ever come to any sort of conclusion and fruition, it will allow that to be placed on historical record that a diplomatic effort was made and an opportunity was given to the world to condemn unprovoked American aggression. After that, it will begin in an escalatory and step by step fashion, either after that or parallel to that. It will begin in an escalatory fashion targeting American interests. American interests are multiple and varied. Of course, you're well aware that there are tens of thousands of American soldiers positioned in countries that are a few seconds away when we are talking about hypersonic missile attacks. It's literally a matter of seconds to get to those American bases using missiles that travel at the speed of Mach 10 or even higher. There is, of course, the international oil economy. There are, of course, the international financial markets, and so on and so forth. So the range and number of options that exist for Iran for retaliatory action are immense, and it can go on picking and escalating these for perhaps months to come, and there will still be more targets that it can pick to escalate forward. So I believe that this escalation will go on step by step, and there are so many American interests that are within easy reach of Iran that this process of escalation can perhaps go on for months, if not even longer than that. Now,
So
why?
I have to then ask you, Israeli intelligence seem to have penetrated Iran in the first strike when so many leaders of the Revolutionary Guards, of the military system were taken out. And so Iran also is described frequently as a regime. It has faced various kinds of resistance within. So I'm asking you that are there forces within Iran that would be happy to see the regime challenged?
I believe that there is a network of Israeli and American intelligence agents and operatives within Iran. Of course, that's a fact, and that network has was able to play a role, especially from the period from the 13th to about the 16th of June.
Hmm.
Most of the attacks that were happening inside Iran were, in fact, being launched from within Iran using small drones, using car bombs, or other sort of improvised explosive devices,
Hmm.
causing minor damage, but still causing damage within Iran. This network has been damaged to a great degree over the last week. Hundreds of individuals, and perhaps the figure of hundreds is conservative, it may even have crossed into thousands by now, or into 1 or 2 thousand, have been arrested, and many locations and sites that were being used to store explosive material, etc., have been discovered. And in fact, today, if I'm not mistaken, is the last day of a general amnesty which has been declared that
Hmm.
anybody who was associated with this intelligence operation has the option of turning themselves in. So today is the last day. Until yesterday, we had reports of a large number of people turning themselves in as well. So there is, of course, an intelligence network that Israel and America have built up, and that
Yes.
does cause harm. But there is no serious political force that wishes to overthrow the present government at this point.
No, so I want to just put this to you that there is a negative perception that even among progressive liberal circles who are protesting about the atrocities in Gaza and against the war now on Iran, that Iran does oppress a section of its own people. minorities, women, and that dissent is crushed mercilessly. Although this is not the time to, because external aggression always gets everyone to rally around the flag of the nation that's being attacked. In Iran, I know, is a civilization. So, under these circumstances, are there any internal challenges that you foresee? Internal, or is everyone united to fight the external aggression?
Well, as you rightly said, in most societies, what happens is that when there is external aggression, people rally around the flag. Iran is no
Yes.
exception in this case. Iran is no
Mm,
exception in this regard. In fact, if it is an exception, it is to the degree of unity. It is in the high degree of unity that has been created here. There are people who are not particularly warm towards the Islamic establishment that rules this country, but they
mm,
have strong nationalist feelings. And that's why
mm,
they are, at this point, they are with the ruling establishment because it is the ruling establishment and they understand that it needs to be supported to be able to defend this country and to retaliate against unprovoked aggression. So at this point, the level of unity is enormously high. And this, I would just like to add that this is a good example of how Iran is consistently misread by its enemies and by those who are not enemies of Iran as well. If I may just elaborate on
mm,
this a little further, when Israel began its attack on the 13th of June, or the American unprovoked attack which happened this morning, let's be very clear. These were not devastating military attacks. These were not devastating military attacks. They were shocking because they were unprovoked. They were, for many people, unexpected. But they were, well, on the 13th of June, for example, less than 100 people were killed in all of Iran, with a population of 90 million approximately. One or two, three or four, perhaps civilian infrastructure was affected. Now, in a large country like Iran, these numbers don't add up to anything. In an army which has got hundreds of thousands of trained people, about eight senior commanders were killed. That, of course, is a loss, but in no way can be expected to
mm,
break the back of the armed forces. So, why was this attack carried out when it was not, it cannot, in any objective sense, be called devastating? That's because there was a miscalculation and a misreading from the part of Israel and America, of course. The misreading was that if we conduct this attack, there will be such shock and awe in the Iranian public, which will then move to disappointment and dissatisfaction with the ruling establishment. And they will blame the ruling establishment for saying that, look, you've never managed to solve, for example, our economic problems, but you always told us that at least we've kept you safe. But you're not even able to keep us safe anymore. And therefore, the public and the ruling establishment will be forced to come to a confrontation. This
mhm,
was actually the plan. And even when it comes to this morning, three nuclear sites being targeted by some bombers, of course, it is an unprovoked attack. Of course, it has to be condemned, and there will be retaliation and a price to pay. But let's be clear, this doesn't even break the back of the nuclear industry or the nuclear community, nuclear science community in Iran, where there are thousands of researchers, scientists, institutions, and the like. By targeting three sites, what are you going to do? These sites will be rebuilt, or even better sites will be built in the future. Dropping a few bombs cannot eradicate a certain technology or a science that exists in a country and which has passions attached with it as well. In no way can you. Once again, the attempt is to somehow send a message to the Iranian people that, look, we can do whatever we want, and therefore do not try to fight us. Now, this is a misreading because, as we've seen over the last 9 days, every single threatening statement or threatening action by Israel and America has had no consequence other than an increase in patriotic feelings, nationalist feelings, religious fervor to fight against this aggression. So, this is regarding the miscalculation of this regard. Coming to your larger question of why is it that there is this perception that exists in the world that Iran, the ruling establishment in Iran, oppresses its people? Why is it that so many people in the world allow themselves and permit themselves so easily to use the word regime when describing the ruling establishment, when they will not use the word regime to describe the murderous American system of government, for example, or the Israeli genocidal machine? They will not use this word. Why is it? Even otherwise sensible, decent people, why is it that they do that? I think this is a very important question. And I think in the current context, we won't be able to spend enough time to deal with it. But let me just share a few statements and thoughts in this regard. I think there are multiple factors that cause this kind of a misreading, even by ordinary, decent people around the world. One is a simple lack of information. People simply don't have access to information about Iran. You're a well-read and well-informed person. You will be able to name, for example, political figures, intellectual figures that live in various Western countries and capitals. New books that have been published, new theories, new ideas, new institutes. For example, you're aware of that. But people don't know that Iran has its own world of its own books, its own theory, its own movies, its own music, its own poetry. It's a whole world by itself. As you said, it's a civilization by itself, a civilization that people are unaware of. So there is this lack of information, which is an important role to play. But I think it goes beyond that. There is misinformation. There is misinformation as well. There is an enormous propaganda machine that exists globally to spread misinformation about Iran. And we can get into instances of that. Perhaps we need a separate discussion in this regard. But at this point, let me just add that there is a
Do that.
massive misinformation
Yeah.
campaign. And the third and the last point, Ms. Naqvi, that I would just like to add, that we cannot disregard the role of blinkers, stereotypes that even decent and ordinary people have. We've grown up in societies where we've absorbed certain messages. For example, we've absorbed certain messages about the relationship between the religion and government. And all decent people in the world have been trained to think that this is a bad thing without any exception. This, of course, this affects how we approach whatever comes to us from Iran. We've been taught that mullahs rule Iran, and this word of mullah, this Islamic, this evil person who controls these simple-minded Muslim masses. This is a stereotype that a lot of otherwise decent people have absorbed as well.
Mm.
There are, for example, theories with these things about religion being opium of the masses, theories from Marxism, Foucault's thoughts, etc. These all invariably play a role in how we perceive and we absorb information.
Yeah. I had been part of an Indian delegation once. A lot of people from oil industry, journalists, academics, and we had visited that office, the media office, which was bombed, as far as I remember, and it was being manned mainly by women in Chadar. So for me, that was an interesting experience. The whole Iranian media was just women seemed to be running it. So I'm just saying, I'm walking in with a lot of Indians and we go there. It was interesting, and that is, Iran is so diverse. It's such a fascinating country, but it is currently under attack. Yeah, you wanted to say something?
I just like to, yes, yes, in the context of the present attack on Iran, I'd just like to just add that one of the iconic episodes in this attack, and perhaps you have also seen that, is the attack that happened on the central state television
Yes,
station
I think
in
that is the
Tehran a
building I
few
was
days
thinking
ago.
too. Yes,
Uh, you
yes.
know,
I think that's the building we were
perhaps, perhaps.
in. Yeah,
So yes. So in that context, I'd just like to, join the topic of the earlier question that we were discussing with the war. There is this iconic episode where there were intelligence reports that this building is about to be attacked. Small scale attack had begun, but a lot of the staff chooses to stay on to continue reporting. There is this lady, her name is Seher Imami. She was the television news presenter at that
yes.
time, and she is live on television,
We
and the
saw.
attacks are happening. She
Mm.
can hear the sounds. Yes, yes. Now, and then, of course, a direct attack on her studio causes her to leave her seat. but of course, the subsequent part may not be something that has reached you, which is
Hmm.
that a few moments later, she was back on air. She was
Yes,
back on air
I
live.
read that. I
Now,
didn't see
for
it.
Iranians, yes, yes. For Iranians, for Iranians and their understanding of what freedom is, what an ideal woman should be, she represents for a large number of Iranians what an ideal woman is. Somebody who is modestly dressed, but who is very fearless in what she's doing, and has a lot of clarity about her goals and is willing to risk death for higher ideals. This is their understanding of what freedom means. And this contrasts with certain other understandings of what freedom is. Perhaps we'll take this up in more
This,
detail in some
I
other
think let's
discussion.
just talk about the world, which is spinning. To me, it appears to be spinning out of control with the fulcrum in Israel, and the war has now been taken to Iran. And you're an Indian there, and you've been there for many years. So, what is the? There are two questions I have. What is the Indian role now, if any, in is that what is the potential for India-Iran relations, or is India now aligned on with the US-Israel axis? Number two, what happens to the Palestinians in this when this becomes this pitched battle between nuclear states? We get back to what is happening for the Palestinians. We get back to the murders we have seen in Gaza, the invisceration of people. It's so disturbing what we have seen in Gaza. And I also would like to, it's a very broad based question. What happened on October 7th, which began this spiral of violence? I mean, when you look back, what do you think? That violence, it was first on the state of Israel, the October 7th attacks. So, what are your how would you say what's happened to the world since then?
Well, I think if we talk about how I'll come to the question on India a little later towards the end. Let's talk about Palestine for
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
What is happening in Gaza and what has been happening there for almost 2 years now, and what is now over the last 9 days is happening, the attacks on Iran, these are intimately connected. There's no difference there. These are different parts of a larger story, different chapters. As I had mentioned earlier, the conflicts that we see may appear to be conflicts between countries. We're talking about Iran Israel war, Iran America. But fundamentally, these are conflicts between two fronts.
Hmm. Hmm.
There is the old colonial front, which is now led by America, the imperialist front, with Israel being its very important and critical outpost in West Asia. And there is the newer challenger front, which begins approximately 45 years ago, the Islamic Resistance Front, which is led by the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Palestinian cause has changed over the last few decades from being a nationalist Palestinian cause facing the Jewish nationalism, for example, in the form of Israel, and it has acquired an Islamic character. And that is why now it is led by Islamist organizations like Hamas and other resistance groups,
Hmm.
which are now in every way part of the Islamic resistance axis led by Iran.
Okay.
So these are all interconnected fights and interconnected conflicts that are happening.
Hmm.
So whatever is the outcome of any one of these has causes has consequences for all other battlefronts. For example, most recently we had America submitting to the Yemenis, to the Houthis of Yemen, signing a kind of ceasefire agreement with them
Hmm.
without mentioning Israel.
Hmm.
Now, this was a great victory for the Yemenis when
Hmm.
the American military machine decided to withdraw and move away from Yemen, but it emboldened all other elements of the Islamic resistance axis everywhere else. The same goes for what happened in Syria, on the other hand. Syria faced a setback for the Islamic resistance axis. It was a setback when in December, the Israelis, along with the Turkish, were able to overthrow their government in Syria and put their own client and their own puppet in place there. So that was a setback. And that affected morale all across the Islamic resistance axis. So it's all interconnected. And therefore, as this war moves ahead forward, and we may be now moving towards the climax of this war, as we move closer towards a sort of climax for this war, the outcome in Palestine, in Gaza in particular, will be greatly affected by whatever happens.
I have a few, you are a religious scholar. I think you, so the whole, how does the faith play out in the process of fighting? And the fact is that Muharram this year is beginning soon. So, and that is the theater in which this conflict, and Iran is a religious society. Not everybody everywhere, but a large section is. So, how will that play out in the consciousness,
Yes.
in the psyche? Because it's when you are confronted with such apparent big powers fighting against you, then you need a lot of mental resolve, right? You need to. So, can you just briefly help us, the audience, understand that? Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that's an important question. And you're right, Muharram is about to begin in a few days. The Islamic resistance axis is a faith based movement fundamentally.
Mm.
Iran leading it with its other components, be it Hezbollah, be it the Yemenis, etc. They are fundamentally bound together by their faith in their righteousness and their faith in the fact that if they serve the cause of humanity, God will assist them even at the most difficult of times. And unless we understand this, I know it is difficult for a lot of viewers to accept this because of, once again, the misinformation and the conditioning to view all kind of religious claims with skepticism and cynicism. I understand that for a large number of viewers, it may be difficult to understand or accept this. But all I can do is put it forward and leave it up to them to see whether they can revisit their own assumptions and prejudices. This is fundamentally a faith based movement centered in Iran, but with its allies all across the region. And therefore, the belief that if we are righteous and if we do the right thing, and if, for example, the whole thing about choosing not to make nuclear weapons despite new threats from America and Israel for decades by now. Why has Iran chosen not to make? Because it says that religiously and morally it's the wrong thing to do, and therefore we will not do it. And despite that, believing that we will still win. Why? Because we have the greatest power that will back us, and that is God. So there is this element of religiosity, which is very important. And at times like this, when this 45-year conflict is going through a peak, this sense of faith, this religious element becomes all the more important and becomes all the more salient in Iranian society, in Muslim society in general. So that's related to this. And as you rightly said, Muharram, which is related to the epic battle of Karbala,
Mhm.
of Imam Hussein and his followers making their final stand, choosing death over submission. This is a central theme and undercurrent that runs through all of Iranian society all through the year. Of course, it is highlighted and comes to the forefront in the holy month of Muharram and the month that follows that, 2 months consecutively, and that those months are about to begin in 5 days from now. So we can expect that as this war stretches forward, Iranian and Muslim morale, Iranian in particular, is going to be uh, rising continuously, both because of the war and because of the additional role that Muharram morning ceremonies and the whole climate that changes in Iranian society as a result of Muharram will create.
Okay,
Now
my yeah, please.
there was a question on India. If you want to come about India, we
Yes,
can
I
come
was
to
just going
that.
to ask you that India, we have such old civilizational links and a language. Our language is just full of Farsi words, and these are sort of the unknowns in our lives. But
That's true. That's
so what is the situation? And India is still supposed to be committed to building a port in Chabahar. So I would ask you that India and
That's
Iran.
true. I think if we look at India and Iran as two civilizational states, there is
Mm,
just so much in common that we can just talk about it for hours and hours. We talked about the Persian language and so many other things that are common between these two civilizational states. The fact that both of them have gone through an imperial experience and then fought against imperialism, India achieving independence in 1947 from direct imperialism, and Iran achieving independence in 1979 from indirect imperialism. So there is a lot in common between these two countries at a civilizational level. But I think that we should be honest and we should recognize that these civilizational links have have not been able to prevent a certain kind of distance emerging between the ruling establishment in India and the ruling establishment in Iran, particularly over the last 10 years or so. Well, in fact, the gaps probably began earlier as India underwent its political and economic reorientation as a result of liberalization back in 1991. And India chose to become to weaken its non-aligned position and move towards a closer position, a position that's closer to America and consequently Israel as well. There has a kind of awkwardness has developed when it comes to government level relationships. I say awkwardness because neither country sees in its interest any sort of open confrontation or conflict. They want to keep it pleasant,
right,
but the warmth that existed earlier does not exist anymore. India, as it has moved closer and closer towards America, towards Israel, has consequently, uh, Iran feels, taken Iran and the resistance access for granted under a belief that no, we can do whatever we want, but
mm,
Iran will, for example, have no choice but to be nice to us and to sell its oil to us. This assumption has driven Indian policy over the last few years. It has been noticed in Iranian strategic circles, and Iran has decided to not show any reaction openly to it. But I think as we move ahead and this war continues, I think India is going to find itself in an increasingly challenging strategic spot as it finds that the regimes and governments and institutions that it had invested in, cultivated its relationship with over the last 2 decades, rapidly lose their influence in the Muslim world, in West Asia. And those parts of the Muslim world in West Asia that had been sidelined or ignored by India rapidly rise to greater prominence. India is going to be facing some kind of reckoning, perhaps, in the near future.
okay, my final query to you is, do you think that the Gulf of Hormuz will be closed down? Do you think we're going to reach that point? Do you think oil prices will go through the roof? In the future, as you said earlier in this conversation, after Iran has gone through the UN Security Council route and so on and so forth, that they will start making those moves? Or will it happen immediately?
I think I'm not in a position to predict timing in this regard.
Okay.
What I foresee is that Iran has an enormous menu of retaliatory options, and it has gamed well in advance
Mm,
how it is going to run down and check off items one after the other on this menu.
mm,
Closing down the Straits of Hormuz is definitely one of the items on that menu. Iran has openly declared that repeatedly over the years. But will that be something that is taken up on day one or on day 10 or day 100? It's impossible for me to predict. Perhaps it may even happen today. By tonight, it may happen, or perhaps it may not happen for the next year.
mm.
Let me also just, as we move towards the end of this, and we're talking about this escalatory ladder and this
Yes.
menu of options, let me just give a little glimpse of what Iran sees in terms of its horizon beyond this conflict. I think it's important to keep that in mind as well.
Okay.
Fundamentally being a civilizational and faith-based political movement, Iran's horizon and goals are not limited to securing what are otherwise and commonly called national interests. In international parlance, we use this term national interest. It's not limited to that alone. Iran sees itself as the vanguard of a bright new age for all of humanity. It may not achieve that age in the foreseeable future. It may take decades or even longer to get there, but it sees that as its civilizational mission. And it sees that its present area of focus as being West Asia, where in West Asia, by the ejection of American and Western hegemony, and by the collapse of the artificial state of Israel, a great milestone will be achieved in this global quest for greater justice, brotherhood, and humanity to be established. And therefore, one of the reasons that you see that Iran is so careful about never being labeled as an aggressor. Of course, it is unjustly and falsely labeled as an aggressor, but it never genuinely provides an excuse. It waits and waits and waits till it is attacked, and attacked openly and brutally, till it retaliates. It chooses not to make a nuclear bomb despite the fact that the whole world will justify it
Yeah.
if it decides to change its action. The
That
fact that it will
I,
retaliate, but it will not retaliate as, for example, lashing out at anyone and everyone. It will never retaliate in that fashion. That's because it understands that it has to build itself up to play a leadership and civilizational role in the longer term that goes much beyond your lifetime and my lifetime.
thank you. But I also want to know, is there not a regret that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon? Because today, when you see social media, all countries, there are some lighter moments when people are saying today, North Korea is the safest country in the world right now. And Indians are saying, thank God we got the nukes. Indira Gandhi and then Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and that, I mean, once you have them, nobody would do what is with you. So these are just the light remarks. North Korea is the way to go on social
Yeah,
media.
my own
Do you
understanding. Yes,
think
this is
Iran
this
will
is an
rethink? Whatever comes in the future will rethink, hypothetically.
uh,
Now we
yes.
should, whoever, now we should have that weapon.
My own reading is, and of course, I'm not a decision maker or even an influencer in this regard. My own reading and understanding is that Iran will not go down the nuclear weapon route no matter what happens. And for that, I think there are a couple of reasons. The first reason is that Iran has demonstrated that the proposition that if you want to stay safe and have deterrence, you need to go nuclear. Iran has demonstrated that it actually has deterrence even without going nuclear. As I said, the attack this morning or the attack of 13 June were not large scale, devastating military attacks. They have more performative usage, and they are more inclined towards encouraging the Iranian public to feel disappointed rather than actually causing devastation within Iran. So, Iran has demonstrated over the last 45 years that without nuclear weapons, deterrence against nuclear powers can be achieved. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, Iran's it has also demonstrated that you can be a nuclear power like Israel, and you can be supported by three other nuclear powers, UK and the USA and France. But a non-nuclear power like Israel, like Iran, can rain almost 2,000 missiles and drones on you. You do not have deterrence despite going nuclear. The same is the example of Russia. Russia is a formidable nuclear power, but it finds itself harassed at every step in the context of Ukraine or others. So Iran has, through its own experience and by observing the experience of other countries, come to a conclusion that in cost benefit analysis terms, it doesn't make sense to go nuclear. That's one part of my answer. The other and more important part of my answer, but shorter part of my answer, is that Iran sees itself in a moral fight, not in a military fight.